From Bowling Green State University and the Institute for the Study of Culture and Society, this is BG Ideas.
I'm going to show you this with a wonderful experiment.
You're listening to the Big Ideas podcast, a collaboration between the Institute for the Study of Culture and Society and the School of Media and Communication at Bowling Green State University. I'm Jolie Sheffer, Professor of English and American Culture Studies, and your host for Big Ideas. As always, the opinions expressed on this podcast are those of the individuals involved and do not necessarily represent those of BGSU or its employees. Bowling Green State University and its campuses are situated in the Great Black Swamp and the Lower Great Lakes region. This land is the homeland of the Wyandot, Kickapoo, Miami, Potawatomi, Ottawa, and multiple other indigenous tribal nations, present and past, who were forcibly removed to and from the area. We recognize these historical and contemporary ties in our efforts toward decolonizing history, and we thank the indigenous individuals and communities who've been living and working on this land from time immemorial. Joining me today are Dr. Jacob Clemens and Dr. Lisa Dubose to discuss what leadership means in 2023 and the particular skills and mindsets they are working to cultivate among BGSU students, faculty, and staff. Jacob is the Senior Director of the C. Raymond Marvin Center for Student Leadership and Civic Engagement at BGSU. His research expertise includes student leadership development and study abroad opportunities, among other things. Lisa works as the Director of Employee Relations and Professional Development at BGSU. She also runs the BG Leadership Academy to help faculty and staff develop more effective professional relationships, partnerships, and collaboration. Thank you both for taking the time to talk with me today. So this question is for both of you. According to a 2013 Forbes article entitled, "What is Leadership?" Leadership doesn't have anything to do with someone's position within a company or their seniority. So I'd love it if you could each start with telling our listeners what leadership means to you, especially from the vantage point of 2023. Lisa, would you go first?
Absolutely. I had an opportunity to read the Forbes article, and I do agree with a number of factors that were identified within it. And it is the ability to influence others, the behaviors of your team members, to help reach identified goals. So in essence, it's not always about the title, a position that an individual holds, but the availability of skills to help influence change. So you may have a large team and you have individuals within that team, and it may not be the person with the title that can help encourage the other team members to move forward, but those that are also as a part of the team. So I think it is a great way to identify how we best influence through leadership. And that could mean making sure that you understand exactly what the issues or concerns are, what kinds of behaviors need to be adapted, changed, or created to make sure those changes are being accomplished. And in other ways, making sure that everybody that's engaged understands what is expected of them. So communication is key.
Jacob, how would you define leadership?
When I think about leadership, one of the first things I talk about and think about as a leader, but also working with students who are developing their own leadership, is thinking about relationships as the foundation of leadership. That relationships is really key to understanding what leadership is, and thinking about leadership as more of a process of people who engage in collaborative relationships, working together, having some sort of a shared value or a set of values where they come to some kind of understanding of this is what we're kind of collectively thinking about. This is what we both care about or the team cares about. And then what sort of collective action? Because leadership is not doership. It's not about only doing things. It's really about collective action, about those folks who have relationships around these shared values, and then creating some sort of a positive change. And the unique thing about leadership is that group of individuals with those shared values get to determine what is positive change. And so kind of to summarize, leadership for me is really rooted in the foundation of relationships and shared values, trying to work together to accomplish some sort of positive change.
I'd love now to ask what each of your own personal trajectory has been into leadership. And again, Lisa, will you start us off? What have been some of those major kind of forks in the road for you in thinking about your own identity as a leader and taking on leadership responsibilities?
That is a great question. And I remember being a college student and trying to decide what I wanted to do with my life. And you have so many great ideas, and you never know what twists and turns will come along the way. And so human resources in this field has been my intentional career choice. And so that's what I've been working in for over 30 years. And with that, there comes opportunities to shift. And so you have to make a decision if you're willing to be adaptable and to learn new and different things. And it helps really enhance your ability to be a more effective leader in serving as roles. And if I could reflect back on a time right after college when I began my career, I remember being an HR clerk doing the fundamental entry-level things that you do when you're in human resources, all the way up to serving in titles of leadership roles as a vice president, as a director, as a manager, to making sure that all of the different elements that go along with being an effective leader, I took the time to learn. And so working within private sector and public sector, all of those experiences helped me grow in my leadership role. And one of the things that I took time to reflect on when invited to participate in this podcast was to look at those different points. And each of them caused growth periods when I said yes to adapting to something different and learning something new. So the key elements that affected me in the long term was willingness to hear, learn, connect, and grow, because having those relationships and having conversations with others helped me make positive decisions that impacted my growth in leadership roles within professional environments.
Lisa, I love what you said there about kind of trying something new, right? And I think a lot of that is sort of a willingness to be a little scared that, like, I don't know how to do this yet, but I'm willing to try. Could you give us an example of one of those new roles that for you at the time felt like a big leap, but it really did help advance your skill set and also your sense of yourself as a leader?
Absolutely. I remember after I left my first place of employment after college, and I had the opportunity to take on a director role in human resources. So I had worked as a clerk, as a coordinator, as a manager, but directing an entire area was a huge responsibility. And when I had managed subsets of it, I just wondered, am I ready to direct the entire process? And that role was for a metropolitan agency. And so it was a large charge from the time an employee comes in the door all the way until they leave, and every factor in between I would be responsible for. And while it was intimidating in a certain sense, it was so exciting. And I remember pouring myself into reading everything that I could about the organization to learn about it before I accepted the position. And then when I got in, I took time to revisit leadership practices to make sure that I was following and demonstrating what I expected my team to do along with me as we made modifications. But it was a very challenging time, but it was one of the best decisions I ever made.
Jacob, what's your story been? Has yours been kind of linear, or have there been some more unexpected zigs and zags into taking on new roles and responsibilities?
I think it depends on the era of my life. I'm thinking back in my own college days where I think I first came to realize that leadership wasn't something you just did, or it wasn't positional. And as I'm thinking about this question about my own leadership journey, people come to mind, mentors, or even just folks I interacted with, people who served as role models, either for positive or negative. And I'm thinking of one person individually who really brought this idea of values to the forefront. She was so transparent with what she cared about, what she valued, and was so congruent. I would be hard-pressed to think of a time when she lacked congruency with what she espoused as her values. Things like integrity, loyalty, authenticity. And if somebody's listening to this who knows me well, they're just like, Jacob, those are what you talk about all the time. Because I heard those and I saw those from her, and I respected her so much. with how she carried herself, how she moved through, how she listened to diverse voices, incorporated different perspectives. And I so much appreciated how she made me feel. She made those around her feel. And then I also had other opportunities where I got to see leaders who made me feel small, not heard, and espouse certain values that I thought to myself, when I have an opportunity to have any kind of leadership over a team or department or organization, these are things I want to avoid doing. Because most times leaders are not setting out to be malice or hurtful or harmful. They're trying to accomplish a goal the way they know how. But I believe leaders, effective and good leaders, are also thinking about who's around the table, who's not around the table, who are going to be impacted by those decisions, and who's going to feel something from those decisions. And so really keeping in mind all those sorts of things. So as I have progressed, I've had different opportunities, saying yes, perhaps too much at times, experiencing a lot of feedback. The other, I would say, zig and zag of my leadership journey is my responsiveness and openness to feedback. And I think there's times where the defensiveness was up and lost opportunities of learning from those opportunities. But then when I learned, even if you don't always agree with that feedback that others are giving about your leadership, being responsive, open to it, looking for that kernel of truth in there, because at the end of the day, that person at some point, their motivation is either to help you grow or to resolve some sort of a conflict or dissonance between the relationship. And so for me, as somebody who wants to improve my leadership, it's what kernel of truth can I get from that feedback? How can I internalize that instead of reacting or responding with defensiveness? And so that's kind of part of my leadership journey, and how I ended up where I am is saying yes a lot and kind of being open to new experiences and to feedback.
And can you give an example either of something you said yes to before you felt 100% ready, or an experience where you were given feedback that was hard to hear, but it opened you up to new ways of doing things?
I think sometimes when there's personnel changes or somebody leaves for an opportunity, things get put on your lap, whether you say yes or not. But if you're in the seat, you're in the seat, and you get some new responsibilities. So my predecessor in this role left for a wonderful opportunity. I got to fill in and figure some things out, and things as kind of the number two in the office you always wanted to do if you were in charge. And so I started implementing those and learning, like, maybe there's a reason why we didn't do them that way. And then that was a hard lesson. And then there's, I think, paving your own path. And so that's something I said yes to. I think some feedback that's hard to hear are when you invest so much of yourself and you believe in something, and then somebody gives you feedback, maybe that's not the best use of resources, or that's really great, but you're only reaching so many students or so much of a population. And how do you serve more populations? And maybe it's letting go of something you have invested a lot of time, effort, energy, and care for, letting it go to reframe those resources as something else that might have a broader reach.
Following up on some of this, Jacob, would you tell listeners a bit more about the Marvin Center and the kinds of goals you have for developing student leaders and a few of the programs that are really central to that work?
Yeah. The Marvin Center, I think at the end of the day, our goal is to develop leadership capacities within each of our BGSU students. And so when I think about leadership capacities, I'm thinking about being a civically minded leader, being an inclusive leader, being innovative, being able to manage interpersonal relationships that benefit both individuals in that relationship, being sustainable as a leader, somebody who doesn't invest only in one aspect of leadership, but understanding it's a long game in a lot of ways. And so those are the sorts of, I would say, capacities we focus a lot on and root and ground a lot of our programming in. I would say some of our hallmark programs out of the Marvin Center, I would say on the student leadership side, is things like the Sidney Erbo President's Leadership Academy. And we just celebrated our 25th anniversary of a scholarship program that provides full in-state tuition and general fees to students. But it is a pretty intense program. It's 4 years. We have over 500 alumni through the program. It's very racially diverse. It wasn't set out to be a quote-unquote multicultural program. But what I would say happened was we were able to bring together a very diverse group of students just because of the nature of the scholarships to develop a multicultural competency each of the students. So PLA, as we call it, is one of our hallmark programs. We have a thing called the Leadership Institute, which is in its 10th year. It's a first-year leadership program. We have about 185 students in it now. It's a semester-long program. And we took what was working so well in the PLA in the first year, and we thought, how do we scale this up so more students had the opportunity? And so we did the exact same thing. We used a good curriculum. We broadened it, scaled it up. So we now have 8 cohorts each year going through this program. And in each year, we get about 25 new students participating. We do TEDx BGSU, bringing diverse groups of ideas and thoughts around leadership using kind of the TEDx brand. So TEDx BGSU. And then we have all sorts of scholarships and awards through our office. We do leadership workshops, and we have peer educators, and a variety of different ways to reach students where they're at and what they're most, I would say, ready to hear and ready to learn from. Because not what I know and what we all know is each student is going to approach leadership differently and in their own context. And so sometimes we need to go to them and not only have them come to us.
Could you tell us a little bit about, with that population and with working with students, what are some of the unique challenges and opportunities of working with college students on leadership?
Yeah. So I think one challenge with leadership is it is a nebulous idea that if I go to each academic discipline talks about leadership. Some departments and schools and colleges have their own leadership courses and think about leadership differently. So one challenge we have is, how do we talk about leadership in such a broad way that it is an umbrella idea, that it holds students from the Schmidhorst College of Business to the College of Music and Arts and Sciences. And so how do we bring folks together and think about leadership? And I think also another challenge is, at times people think about the higher education as a more of a transactional experience of, what am I getting out of it? What are the tangible skills? So that's something we need to and continually keep in mind is, while we want to kind of change attitudes and how people believe in leadership or infuse it, we also have to be very mindful, what tangible skills and knowledge are we equipping the students with that we can easily have them translate it to a career, internships, those sorts of things. So for me, that's kind of a challenge, because I think about leadership as very much as a belief or attitude and not always tangible skills. And so making sure students are seeing the value in it.
And what's one of the things you love most about working with this population?
I think leadership just lends itself to students' self-exploration, figuring out who they are, what they value, not what other people want them to value, but truly who they are, what they value, and what do they want to do with those. And there's a lot of light bulb moments that happen in leadership and a lot of personal growth. And one of the things I love is somebody who discovers their passion, nurtures it through college, and then I see it in their career or in their communities, and they're doing good work, and I get to visit them as alumni, or they come back or speak or whatever that looks like, and see how that seed of an idea or seed of a growth moment in perhaps their first year nurtured it through college. And then I'm seeing a lot of other people in their community benefit from it.
Lisa, similar questions for you. Could you talk to us about some of the key initiatives that are part of your portfolio within HR that are oriented around leadership? What are some of the key programs and initiatives that you're leading?
Well, directing professional development in the Office of Human Resources lends itself to having conversations across campus. So we have the opportunity to partner and strategically plan with departmental leaders, divisional leaders on what they're thinking about and envisioning big picture. So we have a variety of different professional development opportunities to address leadership skills and development that we've intentionally worked on in collaboration with our partners. So sometimes the trainings are unit specific. So when I have my individual conversations asking department leaders, what is going on in your area and how we can help better support you, we can develop and devise practical leadership development within that unit regarding specific patterns. On a broader sense, in looking at addressing a similar topic across campus, what we use is not only the conversations that we have with the key leaders, but I also look at what matters of disciplinary actions that we may have. We evaluate all of the performance appraisals and look at each one of them one by one to look at patterns of what employees are being very successful in that we can replicate in other areas. And we take a look at all of that information and then we develop training sessions. And so some of them are one session where we talk about a particular topic, which may help with some leadership success, which may include something like having critical conversations with team members. And that is very difficult to do, and helping to navigate that process. We can talk about time management and project management. And so that gives us a snapshot of how to address particular issues. And then we have developed a number of series of trainings that we have that include a supervisor series of 101 to 105. And we rolled that out earlier this year, and it has been extremely well received. We've had individuals from classified status, administrative status, faculty status, and some of our key cabinet members saying, you know what, I want to refresh my supervisory and leadership skills. And we start with the basics of what is supervision, and then we go all the way to let's work through real issues that we've had on campus and how to best navigate them going through our policies, our handbooks, things of that nature. So they will get a certificate of completion when they finish all 5 of those sessions, but one builds upon the other. And so we've had other similar series like that in the past, but we spent a significant amount of time reinventing this 101 to 105 series to make sure we made it interactive and to give scenarios so we can walk through and talk through real practical issues, because that helps with the growth and processing and how to be very effective in leadership. And additionally, we have our BG Leadership Academy, and we have partnered in the past with that with other areas. But since around 2015 or so, we took that on in the Office of Human Resources, and we wanted to make sure that we engaged as a part of the cohorts that we helped develop, classified staff, administrative staff, and faculty, because we all learn from one another while we're learning together. And so it is a 4-month program where we have an intense dialogue. We develop curriculum that they read, they view, that they engage in and speak with. And then a big part of this academy is also ensuring that we have a strategic goal that we're focusing on. So we look at what the university's goals are, and we ask them to come up and project ideas. And then what we start doing is meet with those key leaders and find out if there's a gap that we can help exercise our curriculum through and help reinforce what we're teaching while also addressing a real university gap where we can help contribute ideas and concepts forward. And so it has been very successful. We continue to do outreach with our cohort members from the past to see how they've become engaged in taking on some of those leadership skills that we have taught them. And so what we find is making sure that we continue to listen, to hear what some of the needs and demands are, and creating professional development opportunities to address those individual and departmental and university needs. So it has been a wonderful process for us to continue to develop and grow in over time. But those key initiatives have been quite successful for us here in human resources.
So Lisa, asking similar to the question I asked Jacob, especially because you're responsible for bringing together different kinds of employees, right, through these trainings, faculty, administrative staff, and classified staff who may be in more kind of secretarial administrative roles. So what are some of the challenges of bringing those different populations together under a shared notion of leadership and professional development?
That is something that we've had to address. And as a human resources person, I always address it directly. because when we identify and select participants for our Leadership Academy, we break them into subsections to address particular strategic goals. And we meet with them regularly. And so in my conversations, you can easily see who is more confident, who is used to leading conversations, and then those that may serve, as you mentioned, in a support capacity, whether it's a clerical support or in a campus operations capacity. And immediately I remind them, this is not a hierarchy within the cohort. Everyone has the same ability to speak and contribute, because if we're not listening to the perspectives of each other, then we're going to lose an opportunity here. And so the wonderful thing is they all end up learning from one another. Once we level set, you're not instructing a class and in charge of this particular process, but the experience that you have is valuable to the development and how you coordinate as a team together. And so each year we have that conversation, and in doing so, we make sure that we're identifying why it's important to make sure that everyone has a voice and they speak up, because that is a part of their leadership development, and not always being on the receiving side when they're used to being in a supportive role by title versus in a leadership role. And we often have the conversation with them and say, think about this in other capacities just than your place of employment. So here you may have this role, but if you are coaching a team for one of your children or for an organization on the side, you're leading that function. In your church, you might have a leadership role, or in another organization where you volunteer. So taking that information and running it through a different perspectives really help with the development and understanding of, I need to take myself out of my specific role, and understanding that all my life experiences will contribute to what we're working on, but not to feel like I can't contribute my thought. And so we're very intentional about not only watching for it, but addressing it right away and helping navigate through those processes for team success. And that is always valuable. Every single day when we work through those kinds of things, when we're working on committees and thoughts, sometimes there's one or two voices that are more prevalent than others, but being intentional to make sure that every voice is being heard is what's really key.
We're going to take a quick break. Thanks for listening to the Big Ideas Podcast.
Question. Answer. Discussion.
If you are passionate about big ideas, consider sponsoring this program. To have your name or organization mentioned here, please contact us at ics@bgsu.edu.
Today, I'm talking to Dr. Jacob Clemens and Dr. Lisa Dubose about the importance of leadership development training at BGSU and beyond in 2023. So, Lisa, I'm going to pick back up with you. As part of your work with the BGLA, the Leadership Academy, one of the key texts that you use to guide the group's conversations is the Leadership Challenge by Kutzes and Posner. Well, talk a little bit to us about what you think is valuable about that as a text and how it helps the participants think about themselves as leaders.
I was very intentional about using that textbook. One, because it was one of the first books I read in my doctorate program that taught about leadership. And secondarily, it's because it gives practical examples to theoretical mindsets. And so Kutzes and Posner have done all kinds of research over 30 years within the United States and abroad, asking leaders what are the key elements that they have that make them successful in their role. And in doing so, they came up with these 5 exemplary practices, and modeling the way, inspiring a shared vision, challenging the process, enabling others to act, and encouraging the heart. And those factors really resonate with our cohort members as they read the book, because they can see themselves in the stories that they read. And it gives them something to call what they have inherently been doing. And so one of the things that is really important for us to understand is that in sharing information, making sure that there's a link to familiarity. And so that book was key because it is a read that provides them the opportunity to see successful people at very high levels of organization and seeing that these traits are transferable in no matter what the role is. And so it's very important for us to start with that as our foundational textbook so we can level set for everyone, because in the cohort, we don't always have individuals that have a leadership title position, but they're in this to learn and grow. And then we may have others that have held positions of leadership for a number of years. And so it sets the playing field in a level type of way, and then we build upon that. And so I found that book to be transformational for a number of them, and the feedback that we have gotten over the years has been really responsive and great.
Jacob, what about with the student population, especially maybe, I'm thinking of the President's Leadership Academy, but I imagine there's a scaled down version of this with the Leadership Institute as well. What kinds of guiding principles or texts are most important to your work in helping students understand these principles of leadership and put them into action?
Sure. We use a framework, the social change model of leadership development, where we kind of think about leadership as an individual process, group values and group process, and then citizenship. So all of those areas are intertwined. What you do as a leader, how you grow as a leader impacts the group, how the group interacts, impacts the community and society. And so that's kind of how we frame up leadership, that we don't think about it only as it's an individual process or group or how you interact with others. And so some of the key tenets of that model, similar to, I would say, the leadership challenges, this idea of collaboration and working together towards a common purpose, thinking about the individual values of commitment, congruence, and controversy with civility. How do we engage in a dialogue around controversial issues or when we don't agree? Perhaps instead of debating, how do we engage in a dialogue where we're listening to understand? And then what is each of our responsibilities to the greater society, our greater community? Because it can't only be about what's best for us as individuals or us best as an organization or a team or a university or a club, but how does that club organization impact and have a role in shaping the greater community? And also, how does your community, how does a society, what role do they have in developing you as a leader and kind of providing a context for you to move through, I would say, your leadership journey?
In addition to your work with students, which clearly is developing them and thinking of themselves as part of communities and organizations, you are also a Clifton Strengths certified coach and facilitator. Can you explain to folks what that is and how you think that is a tool to sort of maybe help at the individual level folks think about how to be more effective?
Sure. The Clifton Strengths, or is formerly known as Strengths Quest or Strengths Finder, it's a tool Gallup developed where it identifies 34 strengths in folks and typically gives you a report of your top 5. And these are not, calling them actually the Clifton Strengths, it's a bit of a misnomer, where what they're actually giving a report of are 5 aspects of your personality that are more motivators. Are you more motivated by learning and just gathering information? Are you more harmony, where you can sense if there's a dissonance or not an equilibrium? And some folks, perhaps if they're harmony, they might say, I'm going to avoid this conflict because it causes, my motivation is to avoid that conflict, or to use it for good and saying, I can sense conflict, I'm going to almost call it out and I'm going to resolve it and help the group resolve it. And so for me, I really like the Clifton Strengths because it gives a very individualized report. For 2 people to have the exact same report, it's about 1 in 34 million that 2 people will have the same report. So I like it that it's so individualized. It also is kind of fun to read because after students take it or faculty or staff take it, they're like, somebody's reading into my soul about this is who I am, this is how I plan my vacations, this is how I move through my personal relationships. The other thing I tell folks is, if I ask the people closest around you what annoys them most about you, it's when you're mismanaging your strengths. And so if you have the achiever strength, you can't relax on a vacation because you have a to-do list of everything your family needs to be doing. And so you just can't relax. You always have to be doing something. And so I like it in leadership because it provides an opportunity for a conversation about us as individuals, because we all have our own stories, we all have our own identities, and all of that can kind of provides kind of a common language to think about, and also for individual feedback about helping me understand them and them understanding me. I had a supervisor who actually, our first meeting, she provided all of her expectations as me as her new supervisee from her strengths, because these are the things she was looking for. She was looking for me to give her information that almost fulfilled her 5 strengths. And then because I knew them well, I reframed that and I was like, okay, here's my expectations of you based on my own 5 strengths. And so that was a unique way to use it, but I think it just lends itself to conversations, to individual strengths, to individual perspectives, and really developing students and other folks who take it, their increased self-awareness of themselves.
Because so often we have conflicts around leadership when folks aren't aware of their own expectations that aren't necessarily universally shared, right? So sort of bringing that stuff out into the open to be able to have an honest conversation about what the priorities are and the different ways perhaps to achieve those priorities.
Absolutely.
So I want to sort of shift gears a bit. You know, we're in 2023, we are past the worst of COVID, but these past 3 years, right, really kind of threw everything into disarray and also reorientation, certainly within higher ed, how we teach, how we engage. We've also had, increased tensions around civil discourse, things like that. I'm curious, from each of your perspective, are there any specific lessons around leadership that these last few years have maybe brought into higher relief for you? Like skills we really need to focus on that maybe you weren't thinking of in the same way before, something like that. So Lisa, are there any ways that your approach to leadership generally or to developing leadership on campus has shifted as a result of COVID in these last few years?
Yes, COVID really taught us that we had to be adaptable as leaders. And being in the Office of Human Resources during COVID and having a very forward-facing role in addressing the issues that came from release of employees to work remotely if those positions permitted that to happen, to the unfortunate matters of addressing the layoff of individuals, to now how to redirect that work that happened to occur, to how to manage and lead employees in a different way than we've ever done before. As a brick and mortar institution who had definite identity in being present and being in person every day, it shifted to we're remote, and then we had to heavily rely on systems to help us stay connected when walking room to room or door to door was a great way for us to talk about matters, and meeting in person was a great way to brainstorm. And so our thinking had to shift. And as the ones that advise other areas across campus on how to manage, immediately the first thing that I had to do was draft how to supervise remotely, and developing some key elements and some direction for key leaders, and sending that out within a few days of the executive order coming down. Also helping address issues with employees on how to set up their spaces at home where they were handling being a parent, being a child, having all these different things happening at the same time, and need to focus on work and leading with what we called grace during that time. But adaptability was the largest part, because when it comes down to leadership, if we were able to manage through the black and white, everything would have been easy. But when we have changes, especially as significant as COVID was to the world and to us as leaders here on this campus, adaptability became the most important thing that we could do as leaders, from the highest level of organization through every level on this campus, to make sure that we still met the need of what we're supposed to accomplish, which is educating students. And how can we do that? And then those that support that process how do we make them more successful? So the conversations were plentiful in identifying things that had previously been the only way in how we managed it, and that was very rigid, to now making modifications so that we can be successful. And you also spoke to some of the civil discourse on what occurred when there was that transition out, and even bigger when we had to transition back in. And I was primary on a lot of those conversations because COVID was still misunderstood. And, we didn't understand so many things about it. There was that fear factor of coming back into the workplace because everything that we had seen on the news to that point was literally deadly. And so we navigated all of those conversations through what we learned as part of our leadership skills in diagnosing what the problems are, and then adapting what we need to do to continue to meet our goal, but in different ways. And so effective leaders really have to learn how to make those types of adaptations, even if they're difficult, because, we can be very set in our ways and our path, and how we handle certain things, but it shook the core of who we all are as leaders, and it made us think in a different way. And even though there were significant growing pains and maybe some starts and stops, ultimately it was to a great benefit on how we logically think through there's more than one way to handle making sure that we reach an end goal. And as leaders, we all had to be a part of changing our mindsets to do something different, and then communicating effectively how we need to navigate through those processes. So it was quite the challenge, and we still navigate some, but it is significantly better than when we all began to first return back to the workplace.
And Jacob, what about you? What lessons did you take away from these last few years that you're now thinking about imparting to students who come through the Marvin Center?
One thing I was reflecting on is the paradigm shift that happened. We were all in isolation, and I think we really rethought what was important to us and how we spent our time and how we wanted to interact with others. And so coming back, and now the way students, faculty, staff, colleagues, folks, what they value, how they want to spend their time is just different. And we each grew differently from that experience. And I don't think any of us fit in that nice, neat box. I don't think we did then, but I think we definitely don't anymore. And so interacting with folks who might just not have the same priorities as they once did, or don't really want to spend 80 hours a week doing X responsibility anymore. And they're just like, I'm good with my 40 hours now, and that's all I'm willing to give. I'm not interested in going above and beyond, because I want to go above and beyond because I just spent these months doing what I really wanted to do, and that felt really good. And so really reframing how we do a lot of the things. I also think another thing, and I think you alluded to this, is this civil discourse. Folks got very comfortable behind a screen, behind their social media, and really got disconnected from engaging face-to-face with people about controversial topics and truly a dialogue and really listening to understand instead of debate. I think our society has shifted through COVID, through the last, I would say, 10 years, to much more of a debating and almost wanting to say things in an echo chamber of folks who are going to agree with us instead of embracing diverse perspectives, diverse ideas. So somebody who is responsible for helping develop leadership and leadership capacities in students is, how do I help students grow their capacity to not just debate or not just to say things to be heard, but to truly listen, and also listen to folks who might not agree with them or might disagree with them or might share very different values than them. What kind of common ground can they find, if any? But then how can you demonstrate respect to one another? And so for leaders, I believe that is essential to be effective. But as humans in the society today, I think that is very difficult. And I think it's really going to be our students, K through 12 and our college students, who are going to graduate and go on and I think teach us how to do it as folks who are kind of living out, really how to do it effectively, because I think they're going to grow from a society that this was an issue, And I think they're going to provide the solutions for us.
This question sort of builds on what you've just said, Jacob, which is, how, especially in this moment, how do we approach the principles of diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility in a vision of leadership development? So, Lisa, again, from this vantage point now, how are you thinking about the role of diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility practices in leadership development?
It has to be intentional. When it comes down to diversity, equity, and inclusion, that has always been a part of the work that we do in this field of human resources and as being leaders amongst others within the organization. And so having something that is written as a goal is different from making sure there's intentional action that governs how that works. So, for example, in leadership roles, when we are looking to hire positions, ensuring that not only do you have a diverse population that will be helping with the selection of a candidate, but also making sure that the candidate pool is diverse or it can't go forward. When we look at who will be selected to participate on committees, being intentional about making sure that there is diversity in those that are being selected. When I request and ask individuals to participate as leadership mentors for our Leadership Academy, I make sure that those mentors are diverse. And when we're selecting from the pool of applicants for the Leadership Academy, and we have usually 2 times as many individuals that we can take, when we're going through and reviewing those, we intentionally make sure that our cohort is diverse. And so there's a difference in writing it, there's a difference in talking about it, and there is success when you actually do it. And so anything in leadership that is of value, there will be processes in place and intent in place that is actualized to make sure it occurs versus, well, we tried. No, you can't. If that is what your goal is and that is what your intention is, then you make sure that it happens. As a leader, that's what you're in the role to do, to influence those changes to occurring so that we can have all populations considered.
And when you're talking about, diversity within like the BG Leadership Academy, you're talking about a lot of different kinds of differences, right? Because you've alluded to the fact that you've got different ranks and job roles as well as different identity categories and identifications. Is there anything more you would add to that?
Absolutely. We consider race, we consider gender, we consider classification, and we want to make sure that it's not just one population that's having opportunity. So if we're looking to really develop leaders, that means it may be someone who is not yet in a leadership role. And we want to make sure that we're looking across our population and making sure that anyone that could be considered underutilized has an opportunity as well, once they apply for consideration, to be selected to be a part of the cohort. So it's very intentional.
And Jacob, how does this apply to thinking about the Marvin Center's work with students?
I would say, obviously, we have a responsibility to develop, I would say, an intercultural, inclusive competency in each of our students from a leadership perspective. So at the end of the day, as a leader, you're going to interact with folks who are different from you, who have different ideas, different perspectives, different identities. And so as a leader, it is your responsibility, if you're trying to create a team, to ensure each person feels like they belong on that team, that their voice has weight, that their voice has merit, and also whatever you do as a group or organization, that it is going to be positively impacting that community and not negatively impacting it. So that requires a pretty high level of cultural competence and understanding of the world around you. And so we have quite a few of our programs that are aimed at developing, I would say, this cultural competence. I would say on another thought, if we take a step back about leadership programs in general, is thinking about access to leadership development. There's quite a bit of literature that would indicate that students K through 12 and higher ed who have access to a meaningful leadership development experience have all sorts of other gains in their life, whether it's interpersonal relationships, success in school, completion rates in high school and graduation. And so knowing, yes, we have this great, meaningful leadership development opportunity, but we also have this responsibility that we know if we get students through the door who might not think leadership development is for them, but they do, they're much more likely to be successful in other aspects of their life. For example, we have 25 years of data with the PLA. It's a very racially diverse program. About 50% of every cohort we bring in is African-American, Black. The other half is typically white. What I can say, regardless of identity and regardless if you control for college preparedness, those students are graduating at about 95%. The national average for collegiate completion rate is about 40% for those same populations. And so what I know is meaningful leadership development provides these other gains. We thought about that with our Leadership Institute. When we first started, it was about 95% of students who were white, mostly women identifying. We worked with admissions to recruit and be much more intentional with our recruitment efforts. It shifted to be about a third students of color, mostly Black African-American. Those students who identify as Black African-American who were through the Leadership Institute just last year retained at about an 83% compared to the same cohort, about 20 points lower than that. So what I know is that's pretty consistent with what literature is saying. This past year I was part of a fellowship program with the Aspen Institute. About 90 professionals, scholars around the nation who worked with K through 12 and higher ed doing leadership development or researching leadership development with the aim at knowing that if we increase access to meaningful leadership development through either K through 12 or higher ed, we would have these other gains. But we also knew most folks who probably would benefit the most from that opportunity are not getting through the door. And so we have this, I would say, pretty ambitious goal to significantly increase the access to meaningful leadership development. So we worked a whole year on that project with about 90 other folks, and now we're continuing. It kind of spun off into its own organization and kind of continuing to do that work and kind of prototyping quite a bit of stuff here at BGSU. We have a mentoring program at the high school. We do things at the PLA, the Leadership Institute, and other places where we're prototyping different, I would say, interventions with leadership development to kind of spread other places. And so I would say this idea of equity, diversity, inclusion, access, and accessibility is really, really important, I would say, to Marvin Center's role in leadership development.
I have one final question for you both, which is for folks who are listening and are interested in either developing their own leadership skills or getting involved in some of these programs you've talked about, where would you send them or what resources would you encourage them to seek out? Lisa, what would you recommend to folks?
Yes, first, we do have a learning management system called Bridge that each employee has access to, and they can search for topics that we have already pre-recorded. But we also have in-person sessions, and each month we roll out a series of trainings, and you can register and we provide the link. But always they can contact the Office of Human Resources. They can contact me, Dr. Lisa Dubose, ldubose@bgsu.edu, and we will be glad to talk about what they're interested in and help them navigate through our over 300 different kinds of sessions that we have and invite them to participate with those. And if there's something that we have to customize, we do that as well.
Jacob, what would you like folks to know about?
One thing that I'd like folks to know is every single leadership development program in the Marvin Center is at no additional cost to students. That everything, there's no additional fees, there's no additional cost to anything we do. And so we have a lot of different opportunities. If a student just wants to do kind of a 30-minute workshop, just try something out, or take a class for credit, or do perhaps a little bit more intensive series. We have, I would say, just about everything that a student could kind of choose from, a wide variety of menus. So visit our website, bgsu.edu/Marvin Center. Follow us on social media, or just stop by our office in 100 University Hall.
Thank you both so much for talking with us today. Listeners can keep up with other ICS happenings by following us on Instagram, LinkedIn, Facebook, X, and YouTube. You can listen to Big Ideas wherever you find your favorite podcasts. Please subscribe and rate us on your preferred platform. The script for this episode was researched and written by Allison Sporing. Sound engineering was provided by Brendan Akatura and Marco Mendoza.